said John. And your teachers, said Mum. What about them? They're all right, said John. Any trouble with any of your subjects, said John. Said Dad, I used to have a terrible time with maths and history. I'm not having any trouble with anything, said John. Have you got any really big pieces of paper? I've got some big sheets of brown wrapping paper, said Mum. She gave them to John. Thank you, said John. He took the wrapping paper and his felt tip pens up to his room. When Mum and Dad came up to kiss John goodnight, they saw that he'd done a drawing that filled up a whole sheet of wrapping paper. What is it? Said Dad. It's the tip of a tail, said John. Very spiky, said Mum. Where's the rest of whatever it is? Coming, said John. Must be pretty big, said Dad. I expect so, said John. What will it be? Said Mum. I don't know, said John. I haven't seen the other end of it yet. When John was asleep, Dad said to Mum, that drawing doesn't seem quite the same as John's other drawings. No, said Mum, it doesn't. It seems somehow more serious than the others. It does, said Dad. And if just the tip of the tail filled up that big piece of paper, the whole thing must be very serious indeed. Next day, Mum and Dad went to see John's art teacher, Mr. Splodge. What do you think of John's drawings? Said Dad. First rate, said Mr. Splodge. His monsters are in a class by themselves. Mum showed him the drawing on the brown paper. What do you think of this one? She said. This tail is very well done, said Mr. Splodge. It almost jumps right off the paper at you, doesn't it? John says the rest of it is coming, said Dad. It should be quite impressive, said Mr. Splodge. You're not bothered about it, said Mum. Why should I be bothered, said Mr. Splodge. Well, it's such a serious-looking tail, said Dad, and whatever's on the other end of it, it's going to be so very big. I shouldn't worry about it if I were you, said Mr. Splodge. Boys are naturally a little monsters. The next morning, Mum and Dad found another drawing on John's desk. I think we ought to talk to Dr. Plunger, said Dad. So they went to Dr. Plunger's office and showed him the two drawings. This could be something very big, said Dr. Plunger. That's what we thought, said Mum. You worried about it, said Dr. Plunger. Yes, we are, said Dad. Dr. Plunger wrote out a prescription. Take the tablets as directed, he said, and if the drawings continue, let me see the next one. The next day, Mum and Dad wrote in a third drawing. Dear me, said Dr. Plunger, perhaps I'd better have a chat with John. When Mum and Dad brought John in for a chat, Dr. Plunger said, Tell me about these drawings, John. I haven't got one piece of paper that's big enough, said John. That's why I have to do it this way. Looks like being something really big, said Dr. Plunger. I can't say till I've seen the whole thing, said John. If I give you some felt tip pens and some brown wrapping paper, said Dr. Plunger, do you think you could finish it off for me? Are you sure you want me to? Said John. Yes, indeed, said Dr. Plunger. All right, said John. When Dr. Plunger gave him the paper and the pens, he began to draw very fast, moving from one sheet of brown paper to the next. In the waiting room, Mum and Dad heard a noise like 2 or 3 heavy metal rock bands all playing at once. There wasn't a lot of music to it. It was mostly thumping and bumping and crashing around. After a while it stopped and they heard John say, See you. Then he came out of Dr. Plunger's office with a big smile on his face. Quite a lively time you seem to be having in there, said John. You look very relaxed, said Mum. I feel pretty good, actually, said John. Did I hear you say you'd be seeing him again, said Mum. Who? Said John. Dr. Plunger, said Mum. I don't think so, said John. Get everything worked out, did you, said Dad. Oh, yes, said John, everything worked out. No more monster drawings, said Mum. Drawings, said John, as the door behind him slowly opened. Who needs drawings? Okay, now you can ask me questions.
It's hard for you to see over the light.
No, I can. Yeah, I couldn't see a hand raised, but
I read that you started out as an artist and gave it up for writing.
yeah.
And I'm interested that I haven't noticed, and I could be wrong, obviously, that you don't illustrate your own.
No.
Books. Any particular reason for that? Not
No,
using both your talents?
I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. No, I'm a sort of obsessive compulsive, and everything I do goes into one channel. When I was, for a time when I was drawing and painting, I was about to say that was the only thing, but what happened was that all the time that I was drawing and painting, and all the 8 years that I was making a living as a freelance illustrator, during which time, by the way, I only illustrated 2 of my children's books, and one was about heavy machinery and the other was about an atomic submarine, because I was never much good at cuddly animals. But anyhow, during that time, I was always writing bits of things, and I began to sell odd bits. I did a profile of Sandy Dennis for Holiday magazine. I did a piece about a middleweight boxer on a trip to Boston. I did an essay about boats for Sports Illustrated, and I found gradually that writing was what I really wanted. And once I got into writing, it occupied me more and more, and I just didn't want to do anything else. And now writing takes up all of my time and thought and energy, and it's the form in which all of my ideas get realized as much as possible. So I just don't do any drawing or painting now. Yes?
You've written The Mouse and the Child. Where did the idea of the tramp come into play? Were you saying the others were with the pond and the mouse and the child was the particular?
I think it's probably safe to say that in general, when a writer starts a fantasy story involving a quest, that it's quite usual for some kind of a special stranger to come into it as a catalyst of some kind, to get things going, or to provide an entrance to some sort of a mystery. It's just the way, I think it's just inherent in the kind of story that there will be some kind of mysterious stranger who will get the thing going. And that's what The Tramp was for me. Yes?
Were you pleased with the way that Jim Henson adapted your Emmett Otter into film?
Yes, did it very, very well, and followed the style of the drawings.
Is that the only one you were pleased with?
It's the only one I can remember being pleased with. I didn't like what was done with the mouse and his child, but Emmett Otter was very nicely done. Yes?
Why did you name the marzipan pig?
Well, it was a pig made of marzipan. I mean, the
story, it just seems like you killed off the marzipan pig not even like the second page of it, but why don't you name it something else? I mean, it has something to do with say, sweetness and love. Why don't you name it something like that rather than the marzipan pig?
well, don't be angry with me for saying this, but I think you're being a little bit lazy with that question. Would you really want me to have titled that book Sweetness and Love? The marzipan is where the sweetness originated in that story. And the traces of the marzipan sweetness literally went through many of the characters and stayed in the story as a continuing thread right to the end. And it's to spell everything out for the readers, to take away some of the pleasure of putting things together oneself. So it's called the marzipan pig. Yeah.
It's really funny how the owl fell in love with the reader.
Sorry?
But when the owl fell in love with marzipan pig,
Yeah.
he fell in love with
Yeah, the taximeter. Where did I get it?
When did you fall in love with another animal?
I haven't seen a taximeter in the States for a long time, but in London, the taximeters have a peculiar sort of violet light that illuminates the numbers. It illuminates the top of the meter. It's a very fascinating kind of a light. It's a kind of a light that makes you want to follow it and get to know it. And so the owl responded to that, and he fell in love with it. It's a very lovable kind of violet light. It's really me falling in love with the meter. Well, I mean, to the extent that I'm in all of my characters, yeah, I fell in love with the meter. I mean, let's say I was responsive to the charms of the meter to the extent that I wrote about an owl who fell in love with the meter. Nothing strange about that. Yes?
I find your writing and reading so visual. Of course, it makes sense now. I know that you were a painter as well. But how do you come to terms with the people making drawings who go with what you have said? Do you coach them? Do you sit back and watch and accept, or what?
Mainly, my selectivity goes into choosing the illustrator, and I only work with illustrators who are going to be good for that particular story. So when I when I try to get Quentin Blake, he isn't always available. When I get Quentin Blake to do a story, I have a pretty good idea of how he's going to handle it, and the same with the other illustrators I work with. And as for how do I reconcile myself to letting somebody else do the pictures, just pause and reflect on how long it takes to draw a picture and how long it takes to write a page of words. Yes?
Can you expand on what parts of the movie that you didn't like?
The Mouseman's Child? Can I expand on what parts of the film of The Mouseman's Child I didn't like? Not really, because there's so many things I didn't like. I mean, no, it's one of these. It's a strange cultural phenomenon. It's been happening for lifetimes. Film people find something that a writer's done, and they say, "Wow, terrific! This is really great stuff. Grovel, grovel, grovel. Can we make a film out of your book? And we give you money. Here's money. Let's make a film." They say, "Thanks," and take the money. And then they've got the book, and they say, "Well, what we need to do now is make it a little more accessible and a little more cinematic." And trouble here is you've got all this good dialogue, which is not cinematic, so let's put in some bad dialogue and make it cinematic. And then they put in the bad dialogue and make it cinematic, and then they take out characters that aren't cinematic, and then they change episodes, and finally they wind up with a whole other thing. And then you say, "Well, how's it doing? Any profit?" Because in your contract it said you get a percentage of the profits. And they said, no profits. And you ring them up 5 years later, "What's new? Any profits?" No profits. You know. And there it went. Yes.
Do any of your family write at all?
Most of them. Let's see, I have 4 children from my first marriage, and 2 of them, well, one of them, Phoebe Hoban, is doing quite well as a journalist. She does a lot of work for New York Magazine. And Julia Hoban has done a number of children's books for Harper. And my daughter Esme hasn't had anything published yet, but she's done a dissertation for linguistics. And my son Brahm is now doing some freelance writing for a magazine in Austin, Texas. So I expect that eventually all of them are likely to be published one way or another. And the 3 sons of my second marriage don't have any writing inclinations so far, but it's early days. I mean, one is 18, one's 16, and one is 12.
Were you always really interested in writing when you were young? Did you write a lot? I mean, did you get good grades in English?
Did I get what? Yeah, I did. I was always interested in writing, and I always got good grades in English, and I won short story and poetry contests. And when I got out of high school, I remember wondering whether I ought to go to art school or college, and my mother wanted me to go to college and become well-rounded, so I became a proto-dropout, and I went to Temple University for 5 weeks, then I dropped out, and I transferred to art school, and went to art school for 1.5 years, and then I went into the Army.
Are Lily and Hoban and Tanya Hoban, are they family members as well?
Can you?
Are Lillian Hoban and Tanya Hoban, are they family members?
Tana Hoban. Lillian Hoban is my first wife, and she's now writing and illustrating books on her own. She used to illustrate my books. And Tana Hoban is my sister, and she does children's books with photographs.
Can you tell me more about the Bozo dog food can? Bozo dog food can?
I can't hear what you're saying.
Will you tell me a little bit more about the Bonzo dog food can in an Alpine child?
Yeah, sure. That question came up this afternoon in one of my class visits. When I was a small boy, living in Pennsylvania, there was a brand of dog food that we got. It was called Marco dog food. And it had the same label that the Bonzo dog food can in the Mouse and Child had. It was a little black and white spotted dog walking on his hind legs, wearing a white apron and a chef's cap, and he was carrying a tray on which was a little black and white dog walking on his hind legs and wearing a chef's cap and a white apron, carrying a tray, and so on to infinity. And I still marvel at that device, because I would put my face as close as I could to the label and try to see where the cans ended. And of course, after only about the third can, you couldn't make out a can anymore, because the picture broke up into colored dots. But I understood that metaphysically the cans continued to recede to infinity in the colored dots. And it was a very heavy concept for me to deal with. And it has stayed with me a long time.
Why at the end of The Mouse and the Child did you choose to let Manny Rat live?
It just seemed inevitable that he'd go on living. I mean, when I put together a story, I don't feel as if it's for me to say, well, this one should live and this one should die. I mean, if events fall out in such a way that death is inevitable for somebody, they die. And if there is something in a particular character that makes it seem inevitable that that particular character is going to go on living through everything, they go on living. And of course, Manny Rat seemed to want to go on living, and he was not without charm, I thought. Yes?
Do you ever work with children in writing?
I have, but not a lot. And not recently. Years ago, I made some school visits, and I didn't work with small children, but with children, I think they were high school age. And the little workshop session I had with them went quite well. They all came up with good things, but I don't know. I'm not really too keen on, as they say, working with children. I think maybe that working with children is a little bit overworked, and I think there's too much of a trend for show and tellism. Which is, I'm an American, living out of the country for a long time, and maybe some American things that I used to take for granted I don't take for granted anymore. I get letters from teachers. I get big brown envelopes from teachers with 40 sheets of large ruled paper inside, and letters from their classes. And their class, on the brown envelope it will say, Mrs. So-and-so's second grade class at such and such school. And these sweet letters from the kids, and they say, we like your story, where do you get your ideas, please write back. And then the teacher has an explanatory letter, and she says, we've done 2 units on you. I don't like the industrialization of everything. I don't want units done on me. I mean, yeah, I'm glad people buy the books. Don't get me wrong. That's what I live on. But I don't like, we've done 2 units on you. And this working with kids, I mean, I get the feeling that in America, I mean, let's say somebody turns a kid loose and the kid is wandering along the beach picking up stones. And I just know that some grown-up is going to come along and say, isn't it nice picking up stones? Now let's sort the stones in different sizes and colors, and let's put them in a box, and let's write about sorting stones, and let's work with that. And then I just know that somebody in the media department of the school is going to come along with a video camera and say, let's make a film about the teachers and the kids working with the stones. And then I just know that somebody else is going to come along to a documentary film about the videotape of the kids and the teachers working with the stones. And I just wish that that kid that picked up the stone could be left alone. You know, there's I'm sure you've heard this joke. A teacher told me 2 kids are sitting by the window in the classroom, and a traveling carnival goes past, the vans and the equipment for the roller coaster and everything all colorful and bright and music and interesting. And one kid says, hey, look at that, look at the carnival going past. And the other kid says, shh, shut up, we'll have to write about it. And then the kids that have been industrialized like that, what happens? They grow up and they get old enough to retire, and they retire and they go abroad and they start industrializing Europe. They take their cameras and their video cameras and they do products. They produce visits to 10 cathedrals. They say, we did 10 cathedrals last week, and they come back and they show their videotapes and their slides. And so they complete the whole cycle from infancy to the coffin, industrializing everything. Yeah. That's how it goes.
Student, there was just a question I wanted to ask about, like, where the stories come from. Is it kind of like a conscious daydream, or is it something that you methodically...
Wait, I got part of it and part I missed. Where do the stories come from? Is it a constant...
I was wondering, how do you produce your stories? Is it kind of a conscious daydream? I mean, it's like, do you just sit there in the dark and you just kind of come up with these stories from your mind and you jot them down as you go along, or is it something you methodically produce on a page saying that this will be effective and you go to the next stage to continue that effectiveness? Or is this just something you dream up?
Well, it happens in all kinds of ways, but the one way it doesn't happen, people will sometimes even go so far as to ask this question. They will say, do you wait for inspiration, or do you work every day? Well, I work every day. I mean, if I waited for inspiration, I'd be in a lot worse shape than I'm in now. And I work every day. I have a fixed routine, and even the days when nothing is coming, I sit there and put words down on paper. I do what I can to make things come in, however ineffectual it might be. I do it how I can. I use an Apple II computer to write on. I type out notes on that. I ask questions, what about this, what about that, what of such and such. I sometimes do it longhand. There have been times when I've talked to myself on a tape recorder, trying to encourage thoughts to come up that hadn't come up yet. And, from time to time, because I'm that sort of an animal, ideas come to me. And I don't always finish the ones I start. Sometimes an idea will only take me a certain distance and then it fades away and I'm left stranded. Other times it'll go a certain distance and then I can't do anything with it and I leave it around, and months later, sometimes years later, I can do something with it. It happens all kinds of ways. I think that if you're not in the business of writing every day, you wonder how it happens. If you are in the business of writing every day, it's just an inevitable process that you maintain an alertness to anything that could possibly lead to a story. And also I encourage mental drift, sort of. I was saying to class today that by now everybody knows about the two hemispheres of the brain, that the left hemisphere is more for the verbal and rational function, and the right hemisphere is more for the visual and the irrational and the intuitive. Well, I don't know about other people, but I find that when I'm trying to get to sleep, if I'm lying on my left side, I get more verbal ideas, and if I'm lying on my right side, I get more visual things. And I always try to make use of whatever mental state is happening and sort of sift through images that come. And I have a large accumulation of books of all kinds. I buy scientific books in which I can only understand one paragraph or two, but that paragraph might make it worthwhile because it'll start a train of thought in me. I buy lots of art books. I buy loads of natural history books. The shelves are bending under videotapes of nature films. I'm always thinking about every kind of thing. I'm a non-specialist thinker. So that's how ideas come to me.
I was wondering, you have some larger works, like The Mouse and the Child, and then you have much smaller stories like Monster. In a story like Monster, is that something that you could possibly produce in, say, one afternoon, say,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Write it down and it's done?
Yeah, I've done numerous picture book texts in one day. And then I've had picture books texts that might only be anywhere from 6 to 10 pages that I couldn't get together for months. Highly variable. I tell everybody that over the monitor screen for my computer, I've taped a quote from Barry Lopez, his book Arctic Dreams, and he says that the polar bear is not uniformly successful in its hunting, and that depending on the conditions of snow and ice and the age and sex of the seal and the age and sex of the bear, the success rate might only be from 2 to 25%. I look at it and I say, yeah.
There's another hand back here.
Sorry? Oh.
Obviously, you do some research. You said you have shelves of videos and books. But once you start a work, do you ever find that there's a point at which you need to research something thoroughly to be able to continue?
Oh, yes. The heaviest research job was for my novel Pilgrim On. And that got started on a trip to Israel to visit my daughter who was living there then. And we saw the ruins of a stronghold of the Teutonic Knights. I think it was 12th, 13th century. And that got me going. That gave me the protagonist, the narrator for the story. And then I found that I was getting into a thing of the First Crusade that involved 3 religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. And although I'm a Jew, I didn't know anything about Judaism, and I had to swat up all 3 religions. So I had read the Old Testament and the New and taken notes, and I did that again. Read the Old Testament, I read the New, I accumulated notes. I read the Quran and made notes about that. And I then also had to read up a lot of history of the Crusades, and I had to get into such things as technology because, for example, the stirrup was instrumental in social and historical changes. Before the invention of the stirrup, you couldn't have a charge of armored knights, which were the tanks of their time, because you couldn't get the leverage to wield a lance and a sword in that way without stirrups. So it was the invention of the stirrup that engendered a whole age of chivalry of a certain kind, and all kinds of things like that. And I accumulated, I spent thousands of pounds on books for that novel, and I always buy books and any other research materials like a drunken sailor, because I'm very superstitious about it. I always feel that if I want the gods and the forces that help writers to help me, I have to show that I'm not holding back. So I spend money right, left, and center. I'll have this and I'll have that. My whole piles of books accumulate. I go out book buying with a rucksack on my back, and I come back with my knees buckling. And anyhow, that one took, I got through it in only 2 years. But it was very concentrated research, and I do take naturally to it in that I'm good at connecting things. I'm good at finding how one thing leads to another. But I hate to just sit there and read and read and read. I'd much rather be getting on with the story. But when I have to do it, I have to do it.
How about just one more question? Do you have any children's books in the making that we can look forward to?
I didn't hear that. Do I have any children's books?
More children's books in the making that we can look forward to.
Yeah, I've got, at the moment, well, my most recent published book is Jim Hedgehog and the Lonesome Tower, and that's number 2 in the Jim Hedgehog series, of which the first is Jim Hedgehog's Supernatural Christmas, which has been published in England but not yet here in the States, and that is soon to be in production here in the States, so there's that coming. And I have a picture book text that my London publisher wants to do as a 2-color book, but I want it done in full color, so I'm shopping around for a publisher for that. And I have yet another one that's in production where I've done a semi-final text for it, and the illustrator is going to begin work on the illustrations in September. So I always have new children's books coming out, and I try to keep a novel in work all the time. And right now I've got 100 pages, and I'm hoping to get another 100 pages done, then I'll have 200 pages.
Is it possible to get an autograph from?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you come up here?